On behalf of the members and others of the Australian Childcare Alliance Victoria, I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar with Bastion Reputation Management. And I'm really pleased that Bastion reached out to us to address this very important topic. We all go through various forms of, call them crises or management issues. And often we first address this on the basis of how we're going to deal with it legally. But what's also very clear is that we have a responsibility to protect our reputation and our brand and our goodwill and good standing in the community. And that involves a whole bunch of other strategies and plans that we have to undertake to make sure that we do this to the best of our abilities. I'm really pleased that we've got the CEO, Claire Gleghorn, on board with this, as well as Anna Gillett, who is the Principal Consultant, and Anna Butler, who's the Group Client Director. And they'll be addressing the topic on the basis of what are the issues and crises that could crop up in the childcare centre. And I operate 2 daycare centres. I've been in the industry for in excess of 20 years. And I have to say that crises and issues come up in various forms, and different people in different organisations see the crisis or the issue differently, and they therefore respond to these differently as well. I mean, the examples that I've been thinking of that have come up in our time can be minor moving to major, and the minor might be that there are inter-staff relationship issues and how we're going to deal with them. There could be issues between staff and management, or junior staff and senior staff. How do we deal with them? They can be with the daycare centre or the long daycare centre itself and families, and they can completely be left field, meaning they come from outsiders who've decided to take issue with an aspect of our centre that we have zero control over. And they could manifest themselves verbally, they could be physically, they could show up on social media. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and they can even be people doing, for example, talkback radio and wanting to make a verbal complaint about something that we didn't know was going to happen. Then we have other issues such as accidents that can happen in the daycare centre. We've got COVID-19 that's been with us for so many months. These all result in aspects that we need to know how to deal with. Do we ignore them, or do we respond to them so that we can protect this brand name and reputation that we have? So that's the challenge. What are we going to do about these? How are we going to respond? And is time of the essence when it comes to do this? So I'm going to let the ladies go ahead with their presentation. Again, on behalf of the ACA and on behalf of our members, I'm really pleased that you're going to have this presentation. I think it's going to be very informative, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Sam. Before we get started with the webinar content, I just wanted to cover off on a little bit of housekeeping. So we will be recording today's session and sharing the recording with you all afterwards. We've also allowed a bit of time at the end just for a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions as we're going through the content, just submit them into the Q&A panel, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to them all, we will follow up with you afterwards, and we'll also be sharing a copy of the presentation as well. So just wanted to let you know that you can take notes and things throughout, but you will have the presentation, the recording, and the Q&As as well. We'll follow up with you. So I'll hand over to Claire Gleghorn now to get us started.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Sam, as well for that introduction. So, as Sam mentioned, I'm Claire Gleghorn. I'm the CEO of Bastion Reputation Management. We've been around for 5.5 years. I've been with the business for 5 of those, and CEO of the business for just over 12 months. Quite a while ago, as an organisation, we trademarked this as our key motto, which was, "We help you be your best on your best day and the best you can be on your worst day." It was a long time before 2020 struck, but certainly 2020 has been one of those where we've seen the very best and the very worst of people, and it's really actually tested everyone and everyone's response and everyone's resilience as well. So I'll give you a little 1-minute snapshot of some of the things that we've faced this year on behalf of our clients, and many of these I'm sure will resonate, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail around how we work to support organisations across a range of areas. So the first thing was travel bans way back in February that were impacting the education sector in particular, and the tourism sector, and working really closely with those businesses on what that meant. It also had an issue with social cohesion as well, so looking at the impact on different communities who are essentially being singled out, and the impact that was having on some vulnerable members of the community. That then became business continuity planning and working with trying to move masses of staff off-site, and the mammoth communications exercise that was involved in doing that. We then had to work with a number of organisations who, similar to the childcare industry, were impacted by issues of having to stand beloved staff down and having to do so remotely, and working really closely with senior leaders to help manage those stand down communications, and working in partnership with HR and legal teams as well. We've then embarked on a lot of online training to teach people how to communicate through this little camera, because suddenly management, keeping teams empowered, keeping teams engaged while everyone's working remotely and feeling very isolated and anxious is a really tough thing to do. So we've done a lot of work in that space. A lot of confirmed cases and working on all of the communications, and we've built some pretty significant templates and toolkits, which Anna Gillett will talk you through in a little bit of time, that we're really proud of. That is kind of the culmination of a hell of a lot of work we've done over the course of this year, and working with things like all of the other business continuity issues, cyber attacks, data breaches, underpayment issues within organisations. We had a national redress scheme in the middle of this year looking at historical sexual abuse in institutions, and working with organisations on that, and harassment and bullying cases again continue. And helping people to navigate the new world that is media and social media. Outrage is the new normal, and being able to work your way through that. Empathy is at an all-time low, and helping people to understand that this year more than ever, it's not just you who is in a crisis. Every single person you talk to is going through some sort of personal, professional or financial crisis, and it's completely changed the game in terms of how to deliver communications with empathy and with care, and getting that tone right. I'll just jump on to the next slide now. So the way we work as an organisation, and we've set ourselves up from a strategic communications point of view, is what we call the RM wheel. And I'll walk you around it as quickly as I can now, because we really want to focus on, in that bottom left corner, risk issues and crisis management. But I'll start at the top, your brand position. It's really important that at this time, more than ever, you're able to assert the importance and the value of childcare and the role that you play, not just in a child's life, but in underpinning the rest of the economy as well. And childcare workers and healthcare workers and shelf stackers are the new heroes of 2020, and the work that all of you do. When you're in the middle of a crisis, that's the first thing that we'll hold you to, and that's the thing that you can use as your first line of defense. So it's really important to have that story right. We then work with organisations on how to tell that story in a compelling way, working with parents, working with councils, with governments, communicating with media, and being able to do that with a level of confidence is particularly tough when you're a leader of an organisation or an owner of a business and you're under immense personal strain yourself. So being able to give you the tips and tools to do that effectively. We do a lot of work around media strategy and content. Every piece of communications you produce, whether it's a video, an update to a parent, a report card, an invoicing statement, a change in policy, all of these things add up to your overall reputation, and they all represent your brand. So the way you message those, the tone you deliver them in, the consistency of the message across all of your different platforms is so important, and we do a lot of work in that space. Then we get around to risk, issues and crisis. So this is not just when the proverbial hits the fan. This is about making sure that you identify and understand. And Sam, I love the fact that you said you often refer to it in a legal context. That is so true, or people look at IT as being when it's a cyber issue. So for us, it's about identifying and understanding how to work on an issue, prepare for it, plan, and then respond and recover in a way that reflects your values as an organisation and the people who matter most. And lastly, being able to use all of that to garner influence. There's a report that I think was out today by the UNSW just about the economic impact and the reforms needed across the childcare sector, not just tax deductions and subsidies for parents, and the role it plays in women's participation in work. So having your story right, responding in a really in a way that reflects your values, allows you that credibility and that equity to be able to go and have those big, tough conversations and bang the table when you need to and advocate on behalf of your industry. So that's how we operate. We have a large team across each of those areas, and we work really closely across a range of sectors. So I look forward to taking your questions later, but I will now hand over to Anna Gillett to talk you through our approach to risk, issues and crisis. Just on mute.
Okay. It's not the first time it's happened. I'm pretty sure it won't be the last. Thank you, Claire. Thank you also to Anna and Sam for your introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Claire said, I'm going to take us through a little bit about the principles and approach to communicating during an issue or crisis. I think, as Sam mentioned, we've had a bit of a chat to the Alliance about the different sorts of incidents, so that we can try and give you the advice that we think is best suited to that. And we came up with the three broad categories of, as Sam said, something that happens near your service but not necessarily in or directly impacting your service, but you might be mentioned in the media for something, for example, or something that's out of your control. It's something that's directly related to your service, and that's generally an issue or an incident. And then there's probably the third category, which is the trickiest, which is that one around subjectivity, which is around where there's a difference of opinion or a different take on things or how something should be done. And they're the ones that can generally manifest into quite an issue. So the approach and principles that I'm about to go through can actually be applied to all of those broad categories. You just need to look at sort of the nuance and how and the messaging that goes with that. As Claire mentioned, we have developed through our experiences, particularly over COVID, which I know we're coming out of, so the focus is not necessarily on COVID as such, but we've developed a toolkit which does help you with some of this approach and principles, but also gives you some really good tips and templates, and we'll be happy to chat to anyone about that later on, particularly if you need to be able to communicate properly around, for example, suspected or positive cases and be able to live with it, so live in a COVID normal way. Getting back to the principles, so let's take a look at that. So what do we actually mean by principles? For us, they are the essentials of communicating during an issue or crisis. Some of them will sound, as you can see, fairly logical, and they are, in fact, but they're also a really good foundation for you to build everything on. So as you can see there, and Claire's actually already mentioned it, the first principle is actually not about the issue you're dealing with itself. It's about those who are involved, and it's understanding and being concerned and empathetic for them, and that they are directly impacted, and it's probably a really stressful time for them. First and foremost, we are human beings, and we all appreciate someone trying to understand how we're feeling, because that means they're listening to us, and it also helps to assure that we are understanding them. Sounds really simple, but when someone, say a parent, is upset about their children, for example, or angry, it can help to take the sting out of some of that conversation. And just a reminder, everyone, that we will send the presentation through to you as well as the recording. This being empathetic is actually where you can also start to reach a common ground with people on intent, whether it's staff or parents or whomever, that intent to what we would call the undeniable truth, particularly when you're in difficult situations. For example, if you've got someone who's angry or upset or might not like how something has been done, if you can bring it back to the intent, which is generally that you're all there for the well-being of a child, for example, so no one can generally argue with that. So to give you an idea, and we did actually, I think, have a question about this, which we can go into more detail, but if someone makes a complaint to you about one of your educators, but also insults them, there's actually a couple of things going on there. You can say something along the lines of, I know you just want what's best for your child. We all do. That's the common ground. And I'm happy to talk you through your concerns about how Educator Mary, for example, has approached this. But I don't think it's really necessary to personally insult her. I'm sure you understand that she wasn't trying to do harm or do ill by little Johnny. So let's talk through your concerns. So it's about trying to take the emotional sting out of it and finding that common ground and of intent, which is pretty hard to argue with when you're all there actually for the benefit of those kids. Our second principle is about being proactive and timely in your communications. This means that you should be on the front foot and out there and communicating. Generally, the longer you leave something, the harder it is to talk about it. And that's even when you don't have the answers. In the middle of a crisis, this is particularly going to feel hard and counterintuitive. Most people just want to shut down and not talk about it, but fix the issue. You really need to step in and start talking about it. It's hard, but it is the right thing to do. Because by being proactive, you'll be seen to be in control of the situation. You'll be seen to be responsive because you are. You can keep people informed, and you can show that you know what's going on. It'll help to build and strengthen that trust people have in you and that confidence, which is really important in the middle of an issue or crisis. It also builds a solid foundation for moving forward. Our third principle is around being a source of credible truth about a particular issue, incident or crisis. Again, it goes to that building confidence and trust in you. It also means you have a much better chance of getting the facts out there about the situation, as well as the actions you're taking to resolve the situation. You get to control the message, as we call it, and I'm sure you've all heard that before. The reality is that in times of crisis and uncertainty, people want information. And if you don't give it to them, if you don't feel that vacuum, someone else will, and it generally won't be with the fact. That's when gossip and innuendo and rumour starts. So the quicker you can get out there with the facts and be proactive and the source of truth, it's much better for you, and means people will come back to you for questions rather than seeking truth elsewhere, which with the likes of social media is where it can get out of hand. Our fourth principle is about being open, honest, and transparent. Now, this won't necessarily make all the conversations easier for you, particularly with those people impacted, but it will help you to get the message across about why you've made particular decisions and why you've done what you've done. And this also includes when you don't know the answer. Never make up an answer you don't know, because it will come back to bite you. Always be honest that you don't know, but obviously you need to follow it up. Now, as Sam mentioned, you often look at an issue or crisis from a legal perspective. And I think it's fair to say that some lawyers would struggle with a lot of our principles, and particularly this one. And just to be clear, I'm not in any way suggesting that you go out and tell absolutely everything unfiltered and simply disregard any potential legal or insurance implications. That's not what I'm suggesting, but you can be honest and open around what you can and what you can't say for legal reasons. So you're much better to have those conversations and start asking those questions and being open and honest and proactive as soon as you can. Secrecy gives power to information. So being open and honest removes that power. It also helps remove any scandal or the perception that you're trying to cover something up, because there is that perception. Then a second part of the issue becomes about the cover up rather than just the issue itself. If you think yourself about when someone says, did you know that? But generally, if the answer is, oh, no, I did not, there's a bit of a scandal attached to that sentiment to it. But if someone turns around and said, yeah, I know about that, they told me about that a couple of days ago, look, it's not great, but there's much more understanding because you've controlled the message and you've openly said something about it, even if it's not that great. So it's much better to be transparent, but obviously not with total disregard to the legal implications, but we do advocate being proactive about it. Our final principle is about being consistent, and there's two parts to this one. The first is really about matching your actions to your words and your words to actions. That's about saying what you're doing and doing what you're saying. It builds trust. It also builds that confidence and helps set expectations around that. Do what you're saying and say what you're doing. The second is really a practical tip around timing and regularity of updates, also to manage people's expectations. For those of us in Victoria, I think it's pretty safe to say everyone knew that for a long time, Premier Daniel Andrews would make an announcement about restriction changes on Sunday. It's because he was consistently there every Sunday making announcements every Sunday about changes. Journalists didn't bother asking him on Friday, and no one expected him to pop up on a Friday afternoon and make changes because he was consistent. And that manages expectations really, really well. So if you're dealing with an issue, update people regularly, whether it be hourly, depending on the issue, hourly, every 3 hours, daily, weekly. And even if there's no update, it's okay to say, look, there's no update as such, but we just wanted to let you know that there is no update. That again builds that trust and confidence that you've got the situation under control, or you're managing as best as you can. So there are 5 key principles, as you can see: be empathetic, be open and honest, be the source of truth, be proactive, and be consistent. So a couple of other things that we just wanted to talk about, to the next slide, please, I think, which is about the approach. And I think for us, this approach is something that you can apply to whether it's a trigger event as such, so something that's happening now, or any longer term issues. The first one, as you can see, is really about the objective. And for us, that means being really clear about what you're trying to achieve with communications. Again, it's another one that sounds really simple, but one that gets a little lost along the way when you're under stress and under time pressure as well. Again, just make sure that you know what you're trying to say, and make sure that what you're saying says that. Again, that's that words matching the actions as such. If a child's lost, for example, and the child is immediately found, immediately after, your priority is to say over and over again, the child is safe. Don't be drawn into what happened when, who did what, who did immediately. That's not your core message. The core message is, but what's important now is that the child is safe. You can get into those other details later. For other less time sensitive issues, there's the objective, but also then what success looks like. And they're similar, but not quite the same. Because, for example, an example of this is if you're doing works and there's going to be major development works and there's going to be interruptions. So let's be realistic. It's not going to be realistic to say that we don't want any interruptions. There will be. So success actually looks like minimising how we minimise those interruptions. Whether that's minimising the effort on your children, on the children to look after, on the parents and the interruptions to them, the minimising noise on the community around you. So be realistic about what success actually looks like, and if you can define that, then again, between that and the objective, it keeps you really quite focused. And again, really simple things, but ones that are quite helpful. The next 2 things I wanted to talk about are really risks and considerations. I really want to say to you, be friends with your risks, because you can't manage and mitigate them if you actually don't know what they are and understand them. And this obviously applies to the communications as well. So if you don't know the risks, so if you're wanting to communicate something, think about through the risks and how the pitfalls of what it might be and what you're trying to achieve. Sit down and think that through, because if you don't do that, you can't actually nuance your communications and get the right messages and actually get what you need to say out. If you actually don't sit down and think about the risks, if you understand your risks, it's the only way you can manage and mitigate them, and that obviously is around communications as well. The considerations part is just some of those other nuanced areas that you need to take into account. Think about anything else that's going on at the time that might impact people and how they might receive the message that you want to get out. Has there been a situation that's impacted? What are society expectations at the moment? Because that constantly changes. So again, just thinking a couple of those things through will help you hit the nail in terms of the right message in the right way with the right tone. One of the last thing that I wanted to talk through with you, so next slide please, if I may, is around your stakeholders. And Claire's mentioned this as well. So the first thing when it comes to stakeholders is communicating first with those who matter most to you. Again, it sounds very simple, but when there are a lot of loud voices coming at you for information and updates, sometimes we just don't get this right. We look at our stakeholders in terms of impact, influence, and interest. So what that means is you need to deal with those people first who impact your business, who or are impacted by your service. So for example, that's obviously the children who you care for, your staff, their parents, and that immediate group of people. They're the ones who are directly impacted. Then there's those who are influenced, those who can have an influence on your service, or those who you influence. So obviously we've seen a lot of policy changes in the last 6 or so months regarding how you can implement, how you can run your service. So that influences how you work. So you need to consider those types of people. We'd also put in here high profile community members who may not be directly impacted or involved with your service, but who have a loud voice and who people listen to and can influence that outcome. The third group is around interest. And this is people who may be interested in your service, but not necessarily involved as such. So we would put the general public in here, and we would also put the media in here. So as I said, look at those people who are impacted first of all, and then those who influence, and then those who are interested. Just before I hand over, this is where I'd like to mention the media. There will be some people who say that that media can influence or even directly impact your service and what happens at your service, and that you should always respond immediately and do exactly as they want. But our experience is that media coverage will generally reflect how your stakeholders are feeling. So how those people who are impacted are feeling. So logically then, it's more important that you communicate with and manage the interests of your stakeholders before the media, because if you can impact how your staff, how your parents, how your suppliers and your partners feel, then you can effectively influence how the media will talk about your service. We know that journalists looking for a story, when they're looking for controversy, they're looking for scandal, they're looking for novelty or quirkiness, cute animals and cute kids, and for their sheer unpredictability about what might happen. And of course, most of all, they're looking for a little bit of nudity. So that's what they're looking for. So when you think about engaging with media, that's where they're coming from. That's what works for them. Remember, you don't need to respond in the way that they want you to. As an example, and Sam, you've spoken to us about dealing with current affair at some stage. A show like that is all about controversy, outrage, scandal, and they love trying to catch someone out on camera who doesn't immediately answer a question, or who hesitates, or is looking a little bit silly. For us, once you've thought through the approach and looked at the value of actually engaging with the media and a current affair, it might actually be better for you to just respond in a statement rather than being on camera. So you don't have to do exactly what they want, is what I'm trying to get across there. Remember, the media will be loud and they will be persistent in terms of what they want you to do, but they should not be the first people you communicate with, and definitely during an issue or a crisis. I've been talking for a little while now, so Anna Butler, I might hand over to you to take you through some practical tips and tools and applications of what I've just been through.
Thanks, Anna. From one Anna to another. So now that we've covered off some of those more strategic considerations, I'm just going to take us through a few tips and tools, starting off with a couple of messaging tools that can help you frame up and think about how you want to craft your message. So the first one I'm starting with is called Tom. And this is the thing that you can use first of all before you start writing anything down, just to help you really identify the T, which stands for target audience. So that's who you're wanting to communicate with. Who do you need most of all to hear your message? Then you think about O, which is what's the objective or the purpose of your communication. So what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? Do you need to inform people, educate them, give a bit of perspective or context? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then the M stands for your message. So what's your overarching message that you're wanting to get across? If nothing else, what's the one thing that you want people to remember from what you're saying? So before you start writing, it's just a useful way of structuring up what you want to say. And then obviously once you've decided on your communication, you just need to think through the channels and how you're going to distribute it. So what are all the different ways that you can communicate with your people? So it might be a poster up at the centre, might be briefing your educators so that they've got a few talking points that they can use to respond to questions from parents. Just thinking through all of the different ways that you can get your message out to your target audience and the people that need to hear it. The second tool I'm going to share with you today, we call CAP. And this is useful for when you're actually writing your message or communication. And it just provides a really useful structure for your communication. And it really is an essential tool for any issues or crisis comms. So the CAP stands for, the C is for concern. So really starting your message or your communication, demonstrating empathy and concern for all those impacted and getting that out there first and foremost. The A is action. So this is where you can talk to all of the actions that you've taken, how you're responding, managing or addressing the situation. And then you can finish out with P, which is perspective. So that's any relevant facts, context, perspective that you can give to the situation that really kind of starts to get people putting at the issue or the crisis into perspective. Often what trips people up when they are communicating in an issue or crisis is they really want to jump straight to the action, what they're doing to solve it or fix it, or they'll want to jump to the perspective to try and downplay it or put it into a broader perspective, and skipping over that first step, which is just acknowledging the situation and showing empathy. And it seems really simple, but it actually is really powerful to be able to show that empathy first and lead with that. And then obviously once you've got your CAP message, you'll distribute it through your channels too. So those are a couple of messaging tools. This is just an example of how CAP has been applied. So this example was one of the first media releases that the Whakatane District Council put out after the White Island volcano eruption in New Zealand. And it just really steps out that structure. So first and foremost, showing compassion and empathy to all of the victims impacted by the disaster. Then moving on to the actions that have been taken, what support's been available, and then giving that useful perspective that it is an ongoing issue, it's not resolved yet, and that it is still a dangerous and evolving situation. So those are the tools. Now on to some tips. So just a few tips here for engaging with media during an issue or a crisis. So reinforcing Anna G's point that communicating with those that are impacted is so important, and doing that first and really prioritising that. So all of your key stakeholders, your parents, your educators and your staff should always be hearing from you first. You never really want them finding out something through the media or on the grapevine. So getting to them first is really important. And really prioritising that, because they're going to be who the media are going to ask for comment. So if they've already heard from you, then you're already in a much better place. The second tip there is that it is completely your choice whether or not you do engage with the media. Don't ever feel pressured to speak to a journalist if you're feeling really uncomfortable or the timing is just really off. Your focus should absolutely be on responding to the issue or crisis. So engage if you're interested in doing that, and if you think it's going to help you achieve what you're wanting to achieve, but don't feel at all pressured or obliged to. When you are dealing with journalists, make sure that you're getting their name, their outlet, where they work, and also what their deadline is, so that you just have a clear idea of how long you've got to provide your response. If they've called you on the phone or just turned up at a centre, you can always ask them to send through their questions in writing or get them through to you on an email, just to give you a little bit more time to help frame up your response and make sure you're putting that extra thought in to what you send back to them. The next tip is just remember that they are there to do their job, and that's to get both sides of the story. So it's highly unlikely that they will only come to you and get your comment on a story. So you can think through who else they might be speaking to. And this just is another example of why it is so important to speak to all of your key stakeholders first and foremost. Next tip is avoid off the record or speaking on background. There's just no guarantee with that. So just assume that any part of your conversation, including a bit of chit chat at the beginning or chit chat at the end of your interview, any of that may end up in a story. So just be very careful throughout your entire conversation. And then lastly, this seems super obvious, but always stay polite. There's so many instances where people get caught off guard, they're under immense pressure and stress, they might be a bit agitated, and they might come across as a bit rude, and then sometimes that can actually become the focus of the story, which completely just distracts from the issue at hand. So just always maintain a polite interaction with journalists and media. And then lastly, just a few tips on social media during an issue or a crisis. So this is a whole topic in itself, and we could do entire webinars on this, but just specifically for in an issue or a crisis, obviously just being aware that most of your parents and families and staff would all be on social media. And I'm sure most of you can think of examples where you've had parents or staff either complaining on social media or using it to vent. Some people will go straight to social media, whereas others will use it as an escalation point. So they might not be feeling satisfied with an in-person interaction, so they'll take it to social media. Something that you can do right now, literally straight away after this webinar, is just establish some community guidelines. So just a set of rules that you're going to hold people to on your page. So it might be around language, behaviour, so that it gives you a point or a policy to kind of moderate future comments against. So just establishing that clear understanding with people on Facebook or your social media channels can help you moderate in the future should you be in an issue or a crisis. The next tip is, if you do find someone is complaining or venting on your page, try to take the conversation into a direct message or a one-on-one forum, just to help diffuse the situation. The next one is very tempting, but is best avoided. So just avoid deleting comments unless you are openly moderating against your own community guidelines. This is often red rag to a bull and will escalate a situation. People will feel unheard, and they may even just take their conversation to other channels and continue their venting and complaining. But if they're doing it on your page, at least you can be part of that conversation. So avoid that if possible, unless you're being upfront and open and moderating against your own policy. There are some things you can do. So you can hide posts on Facebook so that the person isn't aware that their post has been hidden, but no one else will see it. That is an option, but just to my next tip, moderate sparingly, really. You don't want to be giving your community the sense that you're on there deleting things that you don't like the sounds of. And if you are communicating first and foremost to all of your families and key stakeholders, and they're equipped with the right information and facts, they will actually step in and start to moderate the conversation for you. And they might start to fact check if there are kind of comments that aren't accurate or correct. And that's actually a much more powerful outcome, because then you've got people advocating on your behalf instead of you doing it for yourself. If you do need to get a message out really quickly and you're not sure if all of your parents and families are like your page or engage with it regularly, you can do cost-effective advertising through Facebook and really target it specifically by demographics or by geographical areas, which can be really useful. And then my last tip here is just around when you are posting content to your page. You can, if there is a really important message you want people to see, you can pin it to the top of your page so that people see it first. And if you are posting on an issue, try to contain the conversation as much as possible to one post. It's not always possible, but if you can try and contain the conversation as much as possible, you can get all of the conversation out on that one post, and then it'll get buried over time when you're talking about other things once the issue is passed. So those are our tools and tips that we wanted to share with you. We've got about 20 minutes to do some Q&A. So we had a couple of questions submitted as people registered. So I'll start with those first to allow time to submit questions. But if you do have a question for us, please just chuck it in the Q&A section, which should be in the Zoom meeting bar along the bottom of your screen. So I'll go to our first question. And I might throw this one to you, Anna. How do you respond to an individual, either families or parents, that make comments that are degrading to your educators due to a complaint? Do you call them out on this, stand up for your educators, or just ignore to keep the peace?
So great question. And I think the first thing is to acknowledge that that's a tough situation to be in. And whatever you do, it's going to be a little bit tricky and you need to be really sensitive about it. So for me, I would say, don't just ignore it to keep the peace, because I think what that can do is, one, it lets someone get away with something that's not really appropriate. And also, if that educator ever found out that you didn't stick up for them, so to speak, or that someone was allowed to disparage them in that way, that has a whole lot of other implications as well. I think one of the examples that I talked about before was around you can pull the conversation back to the intent of the conversation and the actual concern, and try to take the personal insult out of it, because again, it's subjective. So if there's a concern with how your educator has gone about it, that's very different to them actually doing something wrong. So I'd separate the personal insults and the degrading from the actual issue, and get them to focus on the issue. And it's just not and say that it's just not appropriate for that. But we're all here for the well-being of the child or whoever is in question. So let's focus on the issue, on the core focus being what we can do to resolve that, and not make it a personal slight on your educator.
Thanks, Anna. This next one, Claire, I'll put to you. Do you recommend setting up agreements with a crisis management firm as part of a future risk mitigation process, so connections are there if the service is ever required?
Great question, and I probably declare a self-interest and will obviously say yes, but yes with a caveat, because I would suggest that you want to find a partner who is actually interested in building capability internally. If you get to a point where you don't have any plans in place, where you don't have any clear understanding of where your risks and exposures are from a reputation point of view and from a communications point of view, and you haven't built up those tools and that infrastructure and those channels internally, it will be much worse and much more expensive to deal with it as a crisis. So for us, the best crisis plan is the one you actually never need to use, because you've done so much preparation, you're so ready to go, you've got all of your tools in place, you've got your channels set up, you've got a place on your website where you can put up information if needs be, if it is an ongoing issue, and you're ready to go and you can tackle things in a really calm and considered way. That's going to get you to a recovery mode much faster. So in essence, yes, but it's about finding a partner who is focused on strategic communications, understands the broader context of your business and what you're trying to achieve, and can build that in, as opposed to just being there like an insurance policy that you can pick up the phone when you need to, because that will ultimately end up in some potentially poor decision making, because that will put people like us on the back foot, scrambling to try and really understand your brand quickly and get to those people who matter most quickly, as opposed to you already having really clear databases of people you need to get to, websites set up, people internally who are capable of doing community management online. To Anna's point, Anna Butler's point earlier around online community management and having that capability, it's just so important. And as someone who trained as an educator myself, for me, that capability building piece internally is so much more valuable and a much better upfront investment than having a partner who you will be paying crisis rates to in the worst possible moment, and when decision making can become flawed and stressful.
Great, thank you, Claire. We've just had a question come through, and please do submit your questions just in the Q&A panel at the bottom. And that's just around if a recording or the slides will be shared, and they absolutely will be. So we'll share the full recording, the slide pack, and any outstanding Q&As as well after the session. I'll go to our next question, and I might send this one to you, Anna. If you have a COVID outbreak at your centre, how do you stop people linking it to your brand?
Well, the first thing I would say to that, thank you, is to be really proactive and upfront about with your communications and get the facts out there as quickly as you can. So be responsive, and again, what I said earlier in terms of say what you're doing and do what you say. So it really is around making sure that you're communicating clearly to say these are the facts, this is what we're doing, and this is who it impacts. And again, making sure that you're telling those people who it impacts most first. In a nutshell. We have, to that point, we've developed, as I said, a toolkit which already has some tips and templates. So some templated communications about sort of staff notices, or so in this case parents, so stakeholder notifications, and also some tips around contact tracing, which particularly in Victoria at the moment we know is a lot of that is falling to businesses. A lot of that responsibility is falling to businesses rather than with the relevant health departments. So if anyone would like some further information on that one, please let us know. And as I said, the first thing is to be proactive and communicate and get the facts out.
And just to add to that, I think what we've noticed and observed over the year is that COVID hasn't been a static thing, in that the way in which people understand it, and as we've learnt more about the disease, about the virus and how it spreads, and what control measures are in place, it has actually normalised the response. So in the earlier days, we worked with quite a number of brands who were particularly keen to uncouple an outbreak with their brand, and at that stage it was because there weren't many cases at that, in February, March in Australia, where it was very early days. And so there was a lot more sensitivity around the lasting impact of that on a brand. But again, if you're proactively talking to all of the COVID safe measures you're instigating all of the broader safety, hygiene, cleaning practices, I think people have become a little bit more forgiving over time, because they understand, like looking at South Australia at the moment, if everyone looks at what Victoria went through, the South Australian outbreak in context suddenly seems kind of reasonable, and the reactions to it and the actions being taken as well. So keep in mind that things like COVID and other issues do tend to ebb and flow in terms of that broader consideration set that Anna Gillett spoke to before. The broader context is that there is less of that need, but equally being able to have a really good baseline for explaining your COVID safe practices, and then being able to recover really well on other things and other stories at the same time.
Great, thanks, Anna.
Can I just add to that one though? To that point that Claire made, things do ebb and flow, but in any issue or crisis, regardless of how you got there, you can always make things better. So don't be defined by the issue or crisis itself. Be defined by how you manage it. So if there is something, for example, that you haven't done the best that you can, and there is something that needs resolving, that doesn't mean that the situation is irreversible, that you can't win back that trust and respect and the confidence of your stakeholders. So there are really two issues when you look at managing an issue. There's what happened, then there's how you manage that situation. And on a really simple term, if you think about customer experience and you had a really bad customer experience, often what you will remember is actually how they dealt with it. Did they just get angrier and go, it's not my fault, and deny everything? Or did they go, look, I'm really sorry about this, let us talk about this, let us give you this, or something like that? And you'll often go, yeah, geez, they kind of stuffed up to begin with, but they handled it really well. And my ultimate impression was that it was a good experience. So it doesn't matter how you get there, you can still actually manage it really well and build that confidence and trust.
That's a great point. Thanks, Anna. I might stay with you on this next one. How regularly should you communicate with staff or parents so that you're not spamming them during an issue?
So I'm going to go with the very unhelpful answer of it does depend. So I think you would know best in terms of how much information you have that you need to get across to your parents. So I think for me, it's about setting a regular rhythm, and whether that's every week or every fortnight, I'd say at least monthly, there should be some sort of regular communication, and then be consistent with that. As I said earlier, you really want to have your regular and you can be consistent around your communications, as well as then build that trust so that they know that if there is anything out of the ordinary that you need to get across, that they need to listen to that as well. So look, for me, I'd say it is a bit hard. So and you can actually ask your parents and how much they want to know, and say we're going to try touching base with you weekly. Don't be afraid to adapt as you go, because as we know, situations change. So if you are doing a monthly update, for example, on everything, and you're getting lots of questions in between, then maybe move it to fortnightly. Weekly might be a bit much, because that's a lot. I'd say probably start at fortnightly or monthly, depending on how much information you have to get out there.
One of the things we've done quite effectively this year, and it was actually the same team that's talking to you now in the childcare space in particular, is figuring out the difference between push and pull communication. So obviously at the height of a crisis, you're needing to push a lot of information out in front of people so they're seeing it from you. You can start to establish those norms like Anna talked about before with the Premier doing every Sunday, by having a website, a page on your website that has all of your information in sequence. You can talk to any latest announcements, but within that page is also information about your broader safety messages, broader information about subsidies that were attached to COVID or another issue. And so it becomes a place you can draw people to, and at various stages you can just then say, we don't have an update, the latest information is on the website. And it becomes a really good way of controlling, but also slowing down, because when it can become overwhelming when you're feeling like you need to push information out as well. So getting that balance right over time and knowing when to pull those triggers is really important.
Those are great points. Thanks, ladies. I'll just add as well that checking in with people and seeing what they're hearing is so important too, because often you'll feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, but it's only at that point that people might actually be hearing it and taking it on board. So just having that consistency is so important, and checking in to make sure it's cutting through, which also leads on to our last question. And if there are any final questions, please just pop them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. The final question, if we don't have any come through while we're answering this one, which I'll start with you, Claire, is how do you know your communication style and approach is working?
So for me, this is all about relationships. So much of managing your reputation is, it keeps coming back to the people who matter most. And we talk about that over and over again, what matter most and who matters most. And if you're not having those conversations, to your point, AB, just before, you're not listening to what people are saying and you're not getting your tone right, you're going to know that pretty quickly. In social media, it's a fairly brutal and quick poll of how your communications is tracking, because you will see the way it's landing with people immediately. But don't just rely on your assumptions or understandings. If you're in a long-term set of issues, make sure that you're looking at how you're regularly not just communicating to, but engaging with stakeholders to really understand, and bringing people inside the tent as well. So when we talk about stakeholder management, which was we talked about earlier, think about those stakeholders not just in a time of crisis when it's actually about you wanting to get a message to them. Think about when you're engaging parents during regular committees or other sessions where you can start to get a sense of what people want to hear from you and how people are potentially going to react. So nothing can actually beat the value of building trusted relationships, and that's going to pay back in spades when you are in the middle of a crisis, and people actually have already built that connection with you as an organisation. Just spitting out media statements in the middle of a crisis can come across as fiercely defensive, and so being able to build that empathy into your everyday conversations, the way you engage, and build that culture across your organisation is really important.
Great, thanks.
I can just add to that quickly before the last question, I know. In a nutshell, the most benefit that you get out of your relationships and the trust that you build with your stakeholders is during an issue or crisis. So that will be, they'll give you feedback, they'll sit there and they'll, because you'll have that honesty and that openness and that I suppose the history of that relationship, they will give you that honest feedback. They'll also tell you what's out there and what's changing. They're also the ones who'll be most forgiving in an issue or crisis. How many times have you gone, oh, that's not like so-and-so to have done that? That's the type of opinion that you'll be able to garner from someone if you've done that work and built that relationship beforehand. So it feels like a lot of work beforehand, but actually in an issue or crisis when you see most benefit from those relationships.
Great point. One final question to close on, and then I'll hand over to Anna to close us out. What do you do if a local Facebook page includes disparaging and or incorrect comments?
I think Anna, your answer to that earlier on, just in terms of community management and guidelines, does help to answer that. There are a couple of different things you can do, and your point around having really clear guidelines and policies on what is and isn't acceptable on your page and when and how your page is moderated is the first step, because that actually gives you the levers to be able to respond in the way that it benefits your brand. You can hide comments that are particularly disparaging, and you can, if it's particularly heinous, if it actually breaches discrimination or other codes, and there are other steps that you can take, they shouldn't be your first step. And also self-moderation is king, and Anna touched on it earlier. But allowing people within your group to start moderating is actually an incredibly powerful tool. And it sounds counterintuitive to have to sit there and watch a post capture a lot of negativity, but think of it like a little bit of a honey trap. It actually, it holds, it's one post, it attracts all of the negativity and then it moves it away, as opposed to having nothing up on there and then you're just having a feed full of negativity. So it's really important that you get those three pieces right. Set yourself up in the right way. Think about how you want to respond that will minimize outrage, and then use the tools at your disposal. When you do put that post up, it's really important to try and flick people off social media as well. So that's where that web page of information and updates, where you can push people to credible information and take it off being engaging in an unregulated and uncontrolled situation. So there's lots you can do. With all of that said, don't be afraid of social media. It is actually a really powerful tool to engage, and there's a lot you can do through video and other means that can be incredibly powerful to build that trust over time as well.
And I think for me, also remember that you can take it back to the focus of that to take the focus of that conversation back to actually what the issue is. So if it's just ugly chatter, as Claire said, it'll self-moderate. But if there is an actual issue in there, draw that out and bring it back to that and try to diffuse the situation and leave that highly emotional side out of it. Much easier to appreciate that it's much easier to say than it is to actually do as well.
Great, thanks ladies. Anna, I'll stay with you just to close.
Thank you, Anna. So just in the last couple of minutes, because we do want to finish on time, thank you very much for having us. We hope you found that helpful, and we're more than happy to answer some questions afterwards. Just to reiterate, this is being recorded, and we will distribute the recording or a link to the recording as well as the presentation itself out to everyone who registered. As you can see there, and as we've mentioned, we do have a communications toolkit specifically for COVID. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. We do also offer training and coaching with media and social media and communications 101, so to speak. So if you're interested, for you or for your, particularly your staff and educators, who are your biggest advocates, please let us know. We'd love to chat to you about that as well. And in terms of advice, again, we'll send our contact details out. If you need help, please call us. We're more than happy to have an introductory conversation and look at what you think you need. And if you don't need us, we're going to say that. We're not going to say, yes, you need us for 3 days on crisis rates if you don't. So if you have a question, please feel free to give us a call and we can talk it through and go through there as to whether you need our help on an extended basis or a short basis or whatever it might be. Please don't be afraid to call us if you need help, I think is what that means. Otherwise, thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much, Sam, for your introductions, and thank you to Anna Butler and Claire Gleghorn as well. And bang on midday, I will say thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.